A presentation on the Electoral College by Alexa Musk. What is the Electoral College? The Electoral College is the formal body which elects the President and the Vice President of the United States. Each state appoints electors to represent the state. When citizens cast their ballots for president in the popular vote, they elect a slate of electors. Electors then cast votes that decide who becomes the President of the United States. Usually, electors' votes align with the popular vote in an election. Although this is not always the case, there are a few examples of when the electoral votes did not go along with the popular vote. For example, the 1888 election. In the 1888 election, Benjamin Harrison's election is a clear-cut example of which the Electoral College vote went contrary to the popular vote. History of the Electoral College. At the Constitutional Convention of 1787, the problem rose of how the President of the United States would be chosen. The Founding Fathers discussed the issue and then decided that the President would be chosen through what is called the Electoral College. This was a system that the Founding Fathers created where state-selected electors choose the President of the United States. The Founding Fathers were afraid of direct election of presidency. They feared a tyrant could manipulate public opinion and come to power. In the photo, I have attached an example of the Founding Fathers. Why is the Electoral College used? The Electoral College was created to balance the electoral power between states with big and small populations. This was the first purpose, to create a buffer between the population and the selection of a president. The second purpose of the creation of the Electoral College was to create a structure of the government that gave extra power to smaller states. The Electoral College was never intended to be a perfect system for picking the president, rather a working system, as the Founding Fathers could not agree on anything else. The party in power typically benefits from the existence of the Electoral College, and the minority party has little chance of changing the system because of the constitutional amendment that is required with a 2/3 supermajority in Congress. Plus, it needs to be ratified by 3/4 of the state. A presidential candidate's view of America. The picture is describing how a president will see an election. There are many states that they either know they are winning or losing, so the swing states are what matters to them. Electorals per state. Representation in the Electoral College is based on population, which is assessed every 10 years by the census. Each state receives a minimum of 3 electoral votes. Additional votes are assigned for each seat that a state holds in Congress above that minimum. State legislators determine who serves as an elector. An elector cannot be a member of Congress or hold a federal office. Generally, the parties either nominate slates of potential electors at their state party conventions, or they choose them by a vote of the party's central committee. The number of electors each state gets is equal to its total number of senators and representatives in Congress. A total of 538 electors from the Electoral College are chosen. Each elector casts 1 vote following the general election. The candidate who gets 270 votes or more wins, although there can be a tie. Electors in Michigan. As an example of how electors are chosen, I have included Michigan as an example. Michigan has 2 senators and 14 representatives, so Michigan has a total of 16 electors. Although in the upcoming election, Michigan is losing an electoral vote and it will now have 15. Also in Michigan, electors have to vote for the candidate who wins the popular vote in Michigan. States using each method of electoral selection. In the attached table, you can see the way the Electoral College electors were chosen. The year is shown with the number of states using each method. You can see the election year, when the legislature selected electors, when there was a popular election for electors or a mixed system for electors. For example, in 1836, One state had the legislator selected representatives, 25 popular selected, and no states using a mixed system. Electors in each state. The attached photo shows how many electoral votes each state has in the general election. For example, Texas has 38. California has a high population, so they'll have 55. Michigan, you can see, has 16 electoral votes. So how does the Electoral College work? When you cast your vote in November, you vote for a slate of electors, who are in turn pledged to vote for a specific candidate in December. State controls the Electoral College by how to allocate the vote. The Constitution does not prescribe a method. Tradition has always been resulted in all but 2 states using the winner-take-all system. Sometimes this system is known as the general ticket system or the unit rule. Under this system, a slate of electors considered to pledge to a particular candidate with a plurality of a statewide vote wins the right to cast votes to the electoral votes. The path to the White House. The photo shows the way a candidate can make their way to the White House. It is showing that a candidate cannot become the president without winning the Electoral College votes. There are many obstacles with this, and it's not a straight path directly to the White House. Critiques of the Electoral College. There are many people who do not like the Electoral College system. The Electoral College is probably most criticized for the possibility that the national popular vote winner can be elected the vote loser. Many people have the belief that it compromises the one person, one vote principle, and they believe that it is less democratic than just using the popular vote. Not only can someone win the presidency without winning the popular vote, another consequence is that it influences how and where candidates campaign. Another critique is that its winner-take-all approach cancels the votes of the losing candidate in each state. Under the current system, each state's electoral votes go to the candidate who won the popular vote in that state, with the runner-up getting nothing. There are 2 states that are an exception to this. In Nebraska and Maine, the winner-take-all system is not in place. Protests of the Electoral College. Due to the many critiques here that there are for the Electoral College, there are many people who see this system as taking away their vote or making it so their vote does not count when they vote in the general election. The images show protesters with this belief. One of the pictures shows a person that thinks that the Electoral College is a voter suppression, and the other picture is stating that the elections belong to the people rather than the Electoral College. In my interview with Deanne Scove, a political science major and an American government teacher, the question was asked, is the Electoral College a fair way to elect the president, or should there be a reform? Scove replied,
I will say it doesn't really matter if it's fair or not. It doesn't really matter what people want to change. It's not going to happen because it would require a constitutional amendment, and there are too many states that benefit from it and like it because they get disproportionate representation in the final outcome because their votes are worth more. So they have no incentive to change it. So it doesn't, it comes up and people like to talk about it, but I think it's a waste of time to talk about it because you're not going to see a constitutional amendment.
Does the Electoral College work? After interviewing with Deanne Scove, I learned a lot of interesting things about the history of the Electoral College, how it works, and if there is a chance for a change or a reform. There was a reform attempt in 1969. It was called the 1969 Reform Attempt. There was an amendment to abolish the Electoral College and replace the Electoral College with direct popular vote. but this amendment was not passed. As stated in the video, the Electoral College is not perfect, but it is a system that currently works and will not change. Scove stated, "The Electoral College makes sense if you know the history. It does not have to be driven with popular vote." Those who do not know the history of the Electoral College will not understand all the things that go into play with it and how it works. So this makes many think that there is a need to be a change or your vote does not count with the Electoral College. This is not the case. It is currently a working system that benefits many states, like those with a smaller population, who would not have equal representation in a popular vote as they do in the Electoral College. There is no way to change the Electoral College because amendment is needed to be passed, and with the many states that benefit from the Electoral College, it is not likely that anything will be passed or go through. There were many academic sources that were helpful in the creation of this project. The article called "The Electoral College, a Misunderstood Institution" by Danny Atkinson was helpful in understanding the selection of electors and the winner-take-all system. The article called "Abolishing the Electoral College" helped give me information on the many critiques of the Electoral College. The article by Steve Bias called "The Creation and the History of the Electoral College" was helpful in finding background knowledge and the history of the Electoral College. There was a PowerPoint presentation shared by Deanne Scove after our interview from a professor at Grand Valley teaching political science that was extremely helpful in gathering information about reforming the Electoral College and the selecting of electors for the Electoral College. I used the graph from his presentation. The JSTOR article called "The Electoral College" by Marksworth and Wilcox was extremely helpful in understanding the basics of how the Electoral College works. My interview with an American government teacher and political science major was extremely helpful in helping me gather information about the way the Electoral College works and if a reform is possible or if change can be made. The article called "The Electoral College in History" was helpful in giving examples that ended up testing how the Electoral College works. For example, how the 1888 election ended up with the Electoral College.